Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we explore the pedagogy, the practice, and the politics around public education. And goodness gracious, we are just mired in politics around public education right now. And we're going to tackle a couple of different subjects. But to do so, I thought to bring on a parent who is in public education and who is an ex-educator. She was a teacher. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and have Kathy Ward come on. Kathy, thanks for joining us today. I thought that the conversation would be much more valuable having somebody from the field, right? Not only a teacher, but you're a parent with a child in public education who is having to be part of this chaos, this beginning of the school chaos. Now, to set the tone, one would think that in year three, one would think that in year 3 of COVID, because that's what this is. This is the start of year 3.
It is.
And
school year, and it's funny, Dr. Good, when you talk about year 3, people will be like, well, wait, this has just been going on for X amount of months. No, in education, we think in terms of school years. It hit us after spring break. That was year 1. All of last year, that was year 2. Now this year, you're right. This is year 3 for educators with COVID.
So you would have thought that we'd be sort of better ready to have a healthier start than we have the last 2 years, but no. We have, thanks to the Delta variant, thanks to people not getting vaccinated, reluctant to do that because of sometimes the internet misinformation that's out there, and with kids 12 and under not vaccinated, that combination has caused a lot of different reactions in different states. And so in Texas, we'll keep it to Texas for right now, but it's just as an example state for those of you that live in other states to sort of compare what's happening here with your state. And unfortunately, it tends to be red states like Texas act one way and blue states act another way. And that's the politics behind this has just been really almost debilitating. So let's start off. First, about masks.
Yeah. Well, and thank you so much for allowing me to talk about this because, again, you're saying the politics of this in education. And I know, I get it. I've been in education, I've been in politics, all that kind of stuff. So I understand. But Dr. Good, I hate that this is going to impact the teachers and the students. And we need to leave the politics out of it when it comes to those two groups. Really? I mean, wouldn't you love to see, that would be a utopian society, but.
Well, funny you should say that. I was sitting in a superintendent group earlier, and I heard the frustration because right now the governor in Texas has mandated that schools cannot mandate masks. And yet you have some of the bigger school districts saying, we're going to mandate masks. And if there's a fine, we're going to pay the fine. And then you have county judges who are have a TRO, temporary restraining order, that says we're not going to follow that edict from the governor. And then there's going to be some more news later. And so who pays the price for all this is, of course, the schools. And when we say schools, that does involve not only the teachers, not only the kids, but the parents as well. So everybody's up in a flux about this, and hearing what the superintendents had to say, they literally have parents on both sides of the fence. These were superintendents from all over the state of Texas, and depending on where the worst COVID increases were happening, you had parents who were absolutely wanting masks versus parents who absolutely did not want masks. So let me just ask you, as a parent, how do you feel about masks?
Dr. Good, I feel like the masks should be up to the individual families. And it was very interesting. Monday night, back to school meeting, and I went ahead and I put my mask around my ears and my chin, like I do when I go into the grocery store, because if I'm around somebody, if it's crowded, pop the mask back on, I walked in and I was in the minority out of a full room. And then all the educators who were there, the, not even a fourth of the people had on a mask, which was very interesting because this is, not that everybody isn't well educated in the world of education, but this is a project-based learning STEAM school that my son goes to. And for some reason, I just thought I was going to walk in and everybody was going to have on masks. But a lot of the people had been vaccinated. A lot of the kids had been vaccinated, and we don't have the issue with under 12 because this is a high school. So I was really quite interested in, or quite taken aback, and found it interesting that barely anybody had on a mask. But then there were some families that they had on the mask, and I'm like, okay, when they go back to school, and the principal, the teachers that said, hey, that's going to be up to the individual students. And so I feel like families can make the best decisions for families. So I'm hoping the schools don't mandate it. I'm hoping they give those kids the choices. And then, hey, if I've talked to my kid and I'm like, hey, you need to wear this, then so be it. I just hope it's not going to be what I've seen on social media. And I know you've seen it on social media, and boy, howdy, I've seen it out in public. And that is, if somebody has a mask on or doesn't have a mask on, you know what? Keep your opinion to yourself, because I do not want kids to have to worry about one more thing on their plate. You have to worry about being bullied for your hair, for your looks, for your weight, for the way you dress, if you have a car, if you don't have a car, all of this stuff. The last thing our kids need going back to school after all this time is to be bullied because of a choice to have a mask or not have a mask on.
The mask thing it really is an all or nothing. And that's the frustrating piece behind the science that people aren't really addressing. And if people understood the science behind masks, which we all understand, when we wear a mask, we're protecting others from our germs. Right. We're not being protected from other people's germs.
Right.
And so if this issue were not so political and it were understood from a science standpoint, then we would either all be wearing masks when we're in high spreader situations, or we sort of wouldn't. Right. Because my wearing a mask when nobody else is not going to protect me.
Right.
So that, again, we have allowed things to get politicized to the point where the science is ignored and people get angry.
Yep.
And goodness gracious, people were angry before COVID. This has just really exacerbated the situation.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're really
emotional.
Yes, very emotional.
Goodness gracious. We can't have a conversation out there unless you're specifically trained to have conflict resolution. And who is, besides me and maybe, John Payton? I don't know if you are.
Through Dale Carnegie, I learned
with
the whole conflict resolution thing. And it's so funny because this literally, it's so funny that you mentioned about this. This plays in a loop in my head at some point during the day. There's not one day that goes by that I don't go into the mode I was in when I was a Dale Carnegie instructor, which is learn to disagree agreeably. That clicks in my head, and the whole, teaching process I went through with that, because there's none of that. I can't say, well, I don't feel the same way. I'm gonna have to disagree with you, but you know what? God bless you for your opinion. God bless me for my opinion, and let's all go on and not be mean to each other about it. That scenario doesn't exist.
I'm on a gardening post. I have a great interest in gardening and beekeeping. And I find oftentimes people will put a question out there and then they'll put, please be kind. Please don't roast me. It's like, why do we have to do that? But I'm seeing that more and more. Goodness gracious, it should be understood that we would
answer. Interesting. So that's on a gardening site. So one thing, that's something that people have a passion for and they love. And also, it's not like you've got a bunch of 13-year-olds on there. You've got adults who you would think would know better.
Oh, yes. Yes. And so
wow,
that cranky, that social crankyism is just everywhere.
Yeah,
And
it
so,
really.
gosh, we've got to really work at that. So we have districts now that are wanting to go against the governor's mandate, and they want to be able to protect kids because, frankly, kids' lives are at stake in some cases.
Yeah.
We'd like to think that our kids are very resilient, but not all kids are resilient. A lot of it has to do with maybe not eating correctly, not getting exercise, not sleeping. They may have home issues that are keeping them, their immune system compromised, and they're not going to be able to shake off the COVID as easily as a healthy kid. So, which leads me to the virtual
Yes.
controversy. We thought virtual school opportunities were over. No, they're not.
No, I mean, and it's interesting, because you're on mine and JP's show just once a week, and even since we've been talking about virtual, because there's been so many questions around it, each week you're amending what you learned from the powers that be the week before. It's crazy. I mean, honestly, here we are. School started for a lot of kids on Monday, a lot of other kids today, a lot of others this coming Monday, and you've had to modify your answer.
Well, and I will tell you that for schools starting next week, they're very anxious because they've had county judges infer that they're going to come out with a big announcement.
Yep.
Dallas area, for example. And so, and they would like the commissioner to and TEA to say something about that also. And there's just, so let's go into the virtual school and how is that tied together? Because I heard a superintendent say today that she already had 10 COVID cases. They've been open for 3 days. Okay.
Wow.
3 days, and they have 10 kids with COVID. So what do we do? Well, we used to send them home and let them do virtual instruction. Can we do that now? Well, so we used to, a few weeks ago, we'd automatically say no. Well, we can't automatically say no now. And here's why. And first of all, the commissioner had a power last year when he gave the district's power to do virtual school.
Right.
He had the power to do that and to let school districts be funded, even though it went against the butts and seats, right? Everybody knows, or most people know, that the only way a school gets funded for that child is if that child is in his or her seat before 10 a.m.
That ADA, oh yeah.
Yep. Yes. Yep. And stays for 4 hours of instruction. So this year, the commissioner cannot do that. And that is because House Bill 1525 removed the Commissioner of Education's ability to exercise this emergency authority for the pandemic in the new school year. The waiver provided by the commissioner during the school year allowed full funding for virtual learning, just as if students were attending in person. It cannot be extended for this school year, this coming school year, due to the language contained in that bill. So they took away that power, and that's why if parents are asking you, why don't we have automatic virtual school?
Right.
Well, the commissioner power to do that was taken away.
Right.
So, knowing that, what I will say, I'm starting to read that there are districts who are going to offer virtual school. So I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I thought that was taken away.
Right.
Okay. Right. So, for example, Plano ISD will be having parent-led virtual option for pre-K through 6th grade students starting August 16th for 3 weeks.
Right.
And so they're sort of easing into it, much like many districts did last year. But you're saying, well, I thought we couldn't do that. Well, districts can do it. It's just it won't be funded by TEA.
It's all about the money. Where's my hand over here in the front of the camera? It's all about that. It's all about the Benjamins.
And so knowing that, what happened was districts are able to use federal funding. Now, you remember, we've never had so much money as we've had in the last few months from the ESSER funds.
Right.
And so they are able to pay for the virtual school, the temporary virtual school.
Yep.
Okay? So, but that's not all. It still is going to be a little bit murky because you have Texas senators who are getting a lot of pressure from parents.
Yep.
Who are pleading with the state to allow online classes because their kids are immune compromised and COVID is on the increase.
Yeah.
And so forth. So we do have a senators who are wanting to listen to their constituents, but they're at the same time they're being pulled. They're being pulled by the fact that 40% of kids in Texas did not pass their math end of year exams, their state exams, and 30% didn't pass reading.
Dr. Good, those numbers, and you said these on our show, and I remember it was just jarring. Every time I hear you recite those numbers, as a former teacher, as a mom, of one high school graduate, and now, in a year soon to be another high school graduate, it's like, how can we accept that? And I do want to say that a number of my mom friends who I've talked to who have kids going back to school, and then my experience Monday night going back to my son's school, let me tell you, and God bless our teachers, just God bless our teachers and our educators. I have never seen such optimism, a positive attitude, smiles. Hey, everybody, come on in. Just high fiving, hugs. Everybody. They are literally. They must have said 10 times at the parent meeting I was at, and I'm getting this from a number of my mom friends around Texas, and that is, do you feel like the teachers are so excited to have your child back on campus? And I said, oh, it was like they were doing cartwheels. And so I just think with all they have going on, with all the pressure of back to school, with the fear of, okay, maybe I'm an educator and I've been vaccinated, but then there's 2 more variants out there. So you've got to be fearful of that, and a lot of these educators have families at home and kids at home themselves. I hope again that people realize and give teachers the respect they deserve, because, and you've talked about this before, Dr. Good, and it's never been truer than this school year. These are frontline first responders. And if you think if you think an educator is not a frontline, first responder, you're crazy.
Yes. Yeah. Everything you said. Yes. And just by the way, when you were talking, it made me think of a headline I saw this week, and that is California has just mandated that people either get vaccinated in their schools or get tested weekly. I mean, it's coming.
Yep. And now interesting that I'm anxious to see still what happens in California. They've got a gubernatorial recall election going on. So I think a lot of the way people are feeling is going to play out of the ballot box. But that's where, let's talk about the political part of this. Okay, make note of who you don't agree with. There's a primary coming up, in Texas in March. Other states, we can find out when their primary is, and then fall of November of 2022, you're going to be able to, in a lot of places, you'll have a state rep or a state senator, your governor, your congressman. A lot of these folks are going to be on that ballot. Exercise. Don't do this in your kid. Don't throw a fit in your kid's school and torture your kid. Go and throw that fit at the ballot box by casting a vote.
Yes. I mean, you're preaching we
always get along. It's like we're in our own little world whenever we talk about this stuff. We're like, that.
Well, and people, I have been amazed how hard it is to get people to understand why they have to value public education, pay attention to public education, be an advocate for public education, because frankly, public education is educating the majority of kids.
It is. It is.
So the majority of our workers for our future economy are being educated right now. And if we don't do it well, guess what happens in the future? Our economy will suffer. And so
absolutely.
Is it being self-serving that we adults, pay attention to public education? Okay. Whatever it is, it'd be a win-win, right?
Even if you're retired or and even, now you've got grandkids, so you'll always take an active, a very active role in education, especially in this, just forming it, what happens in the state of Texas. But even if somebody's like, hey, I'm retired, I don't have grandkids, or my grandkids are out of high school, or whatever the case may be. And this reminds me of a quote that was on the very first slide at the back to school parent meeting that I went to. And I think this is a really relevant point for your show right now. It says, and when I saw it, I immediately took a picture of it. It was like, I love this quote. It said, "Children are not a distraction from more important work. They are the most important work." And I know you're mouthing it with me, and that's C.S. Lewis. And I think that has never been truer. And if people don't realize that, if these kids are coming back, and if their virtual learning's not working and we need to get back in school, which I personally believe they need to get back in school. I know my son is desperate to get back in school. He's hated the remote time and the part at home and he just said, he goes, "Mom, I like being able to have access to my teachers." He said, "I like being able to get up while I'm working on a project, go ask them something, because a lot of times they ask me something that I didn't think of, and I can take the project a whole new way, or my group adds something else. We get a higher grade, or we have a better presentation." I think if you've got to look at those numbers that you mentioned again. They're jarring.
Well, so yes, they are jarring, which is why there's the back and forth tug down in Austin around a bill allowing online learning. But here's how if they do pass it, they want to limit it to only 10% of a district.
Right.
And a teacher cannot do both. Last year, because
Right.
the first year everybody was home. The second year we had some home, some in school, but the teachers, for the most part, were doing both. They were having to teach face-to-face while doing remote. And the way that it played out in the end was the teacher just did virtual school in school. And so there was not real hands-on instructional practice going on. It was just virtual school in school. And so that maybe was a little bit more successful for those kids because they had access to the teacher, like you just talked about with your son. But the virtual kids did not do as well. And I've heard superintendents say, we are looking at the data, and the data is not favorable for those kids who did online versus the ones who came to school.
Right.
So even if you had kids doing virtual school in school, they still performed better.
There's something about being in that classroom and having, I really do think a lot of it, and I go back to God bless our teachers. I go back to the access to the teacher. And there's some kind of a chemistry that goes on when you've got the teacher right there and the kid right there, and you can walk up to the teacher's desk and ask a question. You don't have to ask it, raise your hand, because a lot of kids are, and I know, and you talked about this on a number of your shows, especially when we were in the lockdown, where you had kids who were very nervous about raising their hand. A lot of kids didn't even want their picture on the screen, and the teachers were like, "Hey, I have to see that you're there," and they're like, "Well, I'm here, but I don't want to put my picture up." So I think being able to have that access, and especially the kids that have went to school and then all of a sudden were thrown into the virtual learning world, and having been a teacher myself, and Dr. Good, I was a special education teacher.
Yeah.
I still sit there and I'm in awe of, my friends who are still in that field. I don't know how I would have done it. Because my job was very, 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 very hands-on and very one-on-one. And I don't know how they do it.
Yeah. Well, I wish that our legislators and Commissioner Morath could sort of look at the big picture and say, gosh, we have really done a number on our teachers and our kids. I wonder how we can still have effective learning while not being punitive, while not holding the state tests over their heads or punishing them for the result.
Yep.
Now, if we do get an online bill passed, and again, right now we don't have quorum in the House, but I think they're still up in Washington, aren't they?
Yeah, and a lot of them are.
Yeah. A couple are in Portugal.
I was gonna say, and then some of them are on vacation. I'm like,
mhm.
oh, that's
Wow,
a whole nother
politics.
topic for a
Yeah.
whole nother show.
So
Oh,
what they want to do is to force high quality virtual options,
yes.
which means first of all a dedicated teacher,
Yep.
and then they must have a test grades in there. They won't allow just like K2
Right. Right.
tested grades, and kids can come back anytime.
Right.
So we will see if that's allowed right now. And I remember talking about this on your show, and I thought it was particularly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If they do pass this bill, right now it's slated to be allowed till 2027. There are a lot of
Yeah.
legislators who don't want that. They will, just for that very date, they will not vote for it unless it's changed to 2023. Because what
Yeah.
they want to do is to look at it again during the legislative session in 2 years versus sort of giving that thought, because they're afraid that if we pass a bill, they pass a bill that is that long in time, that we're
Right.
giving the idea to parents that this is a permanent fixture,
Yes.
and they're not ready for that.
Well, it turns into Social Security. Wasn't Social Security
Yes.
supposed to be temporary? And so I think if I were, and you and I, we're friends and we know a number of legislators and talk to them on a regular basis. I think if I were an elected official right now making a decision on this, I would not be comfortable with the 2007. Again, there is going to be another session that happens. Now, right now we're in Texas, and I know you've explained this to your audience. We've got a special session, which is the only reason why we can talk about this right now. Normally, we would not be in session. But you're going to have another scheduled, regular legislative session in between now and the 2007. So I would not be okay with voting for something that said 2007, 2003 would be a different story, because then, or not,
well, then you have data.
2023, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And we would have 2 years worth of data.
Exactly. And I think that data is going, Dr. Good, and I mean, I'm preaching to the choir with you. You're a big data person. I think that data is going to be very telling. I don't know what way, but I think there's going to be so much information in that experts can look into. I think that'll be very relevant, and then have a more educated conversation at that time, instead of throwing something into more permanency, so to speak.
So what we know right now is that for the most part, the majority of kids who went to school last year did better than kids who did total online learning.
Right.
What we also know is that kids who had a teacher who was a dedicated online teacher tended to score higher than other kids who did virtual, who did not have a dedicated teacher. Yep. All of those nuances are being explored.
Well, and let me ask you this, because you've got younger grandchildren. So also, I think if you're a parent who has, your job has gone virtual, but you're pretty much attached to your computer, because if you walk away for too long, they're going to see that you're not productive, versus a parent who has a more flexible schedule, who maybe they can do their work in the evening or really early in the morning, and they can hop on and be active online with their kids. I wonder if that makes a difference too, especially with the younger kids.
We will know that soon, because Plano ISD is offering parent-led virtual option. So what they're doing is they're asking their parents to actually be the teachers, to reinforce the instruction. And so, it says parents will have until Wednesday so it will close. Last week it closed, and the district laid out several expectations for both parents and students, mostly focused on creating a learning home environment. Teacher expectations for the various grades are outlined as well. So think about that.
Yep.
That's a nuance as well. And so we'll be very anxious to look at the data around that experiment. They're not letting a whole lot of kids do it, and they have a lot of kids on the waiting list. But Frisco is also doing virtual. So we have little pilot programs going on everywhere that will give us
Right.
data that we need to help us know what does 21st century school look like.
Right.
And, one day we may be not exactly thanking COVID, but understanding that COVID forced these uh, new practices to come
Right.
on faster. Because I remember when I first started 35 years ago in education, they used to say that change in education takes 30 years to come.
Yes.
I don't think we can say that anymore, thanks to technology.
No, no. It's here whether you want it or not.
Yep. So anyway, thank you so much for being
Thanks for
on and
having me.
helping us
Thank
explore
you.
these and try to make sense of some of the
Yes.
craziness that is public education right now. The story will, stay tuned, because who knows what we'll be saying next week, right? But
Oh,
thank you for being on with us.
thank you for having me. Thank you.
Always a
Stay safe
pleasure.
and healthy.
Thank you. You too. As always, our time goes by quickly when we're together, and I thank you for being on. Please make sure you write any questions or comments that you have, and if you're not watching it live, we'll get back to you, because I'll get notified and I'll be able to answer your question or reflect with you. As always, thank you, and we'll see you next week.